Would you rather sleep on the streets than accept money from the very person who destroyed your childhood? That was my choice. My father, wealthy, generous, always offering help, was also the man who abused us growing up. My siblings took his money without a second thought, but me. I would rather struggle alone than owe him anything. This is the story of why I said no, even when it meant losing everything. I don't think most people truly understand what it feels like to turn down help you desperately need. It sounds irrational, even reckless. But when the lifeline comes from the very hand that once dragged you under, you start to wonder, will grabbing it save me or pull me under again? That's exactly how I felt every time my father offered to help me. On paper, he was the kind of father anyone could envy. Wealthy, successful, always willing to pay for tuition, fix the plumbing, or cover unexpected bills. To the outside world, he was generous, respectable, and kind. My siblings saw him that way without hesitation. They admired him, trusted him, leaned on him. I could not, because behind the generosity was the man who had turned our childhood into a nightmare. He had taught me that love was conditional, that family was no place for safety, and that hands could be used more for punishment than comfort. So when he offered help now, no matter how desperate my situation, all I could hear was the echo of the past. I saw the child I had once been, trembling in a dark room, searching for a shred of warmth that had never come. I felt the shame of being trapped in his orbit again. Accepting his money now would be like giving him permission to control me once more. I would rather be homeless than give him that power. I remember the first time he tried to help me after I left home. I was 19, just starting college. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the campus library, evenings washing dishes in a small Italian restaurant. Sleep was scarce, tuition felt like a mountain, and there were nights when the electricity got cut off because I couldn't pay. When my father found out, he shook his head, then pulled out a check and placed it in front of me, as if to prove I couldn't survive without him. "You don't need to struggle like this," he said, his voice a mixture of pity and command. "Take this, and life will be easier." I pushed the check back at that moment. I wasn't sure if I hated his pity more, or the thought of being bound again. My childhood memories were a series of storms with almost no calm moments. I remembered his sudden outbursts, his shouts echoing through the house, the feeling that every mistake I made would be met with punishment. I learned to stay silent, to avoid his gaze, to survive without ever provoking him. My siblings adapted differently. They accepted his money, depended on him, convinced themselves it was normal. I watched them from afar, sometimes feeling both pity and anger-pity, because they had never known freedom. Anger because they seemed to forget the pain that still lingered for me. Now, years into my own independence, life was still a struggle. My apartment was small, barely furnished, and I still worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Each day began as a grind. Breakfast for myself, morning job, classes, evening job, sleep, and then repeat. I never complained, because my independence was the only pride I could truly call mine. And when my father appeared, offering to help, I didn't see kindness. I saw control. I saw the past reaching out to claim me again. My siblings knew about it, and unsurprisingly, criticized me. They called me stubborn, childish, unrealistic. They said I couldn't survive without his money. They didn't understand that my refusal wasn't about pride, was about freedom, about preserving myself, about proving that I could exist without owing him anything. I only said one thing: "You'll regret taking his money, because when he has the chance, he'll use it against you." I refused, and I'm still standing. I may fail, but I will fail on my own terms, not his. I remember lying awake in my small, dimly lit apartment, listening to the rain patter against the window, reminding myself that if I ever gave in, I would lose more than money. I had seen my siblings laugh and joke while accepting gifts, checks, favors, and I understood that for them, money was salvation. For me, it was a chain. Every step toward independence was hard, but I learned that independence wasn't just about survival. It was about self-respect, about maintaining dignity, about not letting the past dictate the future. I did everything on my own. School, work, bills. Even when exhaustion threatened to crush me, I remember the way my father looked at me during our encounters, half pride, half challenge, as if asking, "Can you really survive without me?" And I would look back, silently reminding myself that my existence, my successes or failures, didn't need his judgment or his aid. In that dimly lit room, the warm yellow glow of a single lamp, I gazed out the window at people walking by on the street, each carrying their own stories, their own battles. I told myself, no matter what happens, I will keep moving forward. I will hold on to my pride, even if it means hunger, fatigue, or loneliness. Because freedom, independence, and the ability to live on my own terms, that is what I had learned from a childhood full of pain. After refusing my father's help once again, the tension in my family began to rise. My siblings didn't understand why I would reject an offer that most people would kill for. To them, his money wasn't tainted, was simply opportunity. They didn't see the strings hidden behind every check, every gesture of generosity. They didn't remember, or perhaps they had chosen to forget, the past that still haunted me. "Why are you being so stubborn?" my older sister asked one evening over a video call. Her tone carried a mixture of frustration and genuine confusion. "It's just money. You think you can survive without it." I paused, feeling the familiar weight of anger and sadness pressing in on me. "It's not about the money," I replied softly but firmly. "It's about not letting him control me. It's about keeping the one thing he can never take away, my independence." My brother snorted. "You sound ridiculous. You're just making your life harder than it needs to be. We all accepted help, and we're fine. You could do the same, you know." The conversation ended with the usual accusations: childish, prideful, unrealistic. They didn't understand that my refusal was a survival mechanism, a way of reclaiming power from someone who had taken it from me for years. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about how different our childhoods must have felt. We grew up under the same roof, experienced the same punishments, the same strict rules, the same constant fear. Yet somehow, my siblings had found a way to compartmentalize it, to accept what came later in the form of comfort and wealth. I hadn't. I could never. I thought about the times I had tried to reach out to them when we were younger. I had shared my fears, my nightmares, my doubts. Some had listened, nodded politely, then gone back to their own lives. Others had mocked me. I had learned to keep the most painful parts of myself hidden. And now, when the stakes were real, when money and independence collided, they were judging me again, unaware of the cost I had paid just to maintain control over my own life. The days that followed were a blur of work and study. I often walked long distances between jobs because I couldn't afford transportation. I spent hours in the library, not just attending classes, but studying extra hours to stay ahead. Every paycheck I earned went toward rent, bills, groceries, every dime, a testament to my ability to survive on my own. Yet, despite my independence, there were moments when loneliness crept in like a shadow. I would sit in my tiny apartment, exhausted, thinking about how easy it would be to accept my father's money. I could finally sleep through the night without worrying about overdue bills. I could buy a proper meal instead of scavenging leftovers from the fridge. I could rest just once, without fear or stress. But each time, the memory of his hands, the ones that had punished, controlled, and frightened me, flashed through my mind. Accepting anything from him would be a surrender, a relapse into a life I had fought so hard to escape. And so I endured, trading comfort for freedom, exhaustion for self-respect. One evening, my sister came over to my apartment without warning. I had been asleep on the couch after a double shift, and I woke to find her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a mixture of anger and concern on her face. "You need to stop this," she said immediately. "You're making yourself miserable. Accept the money just this once. You'll see, it's not the end of the world." I rubbed my eyes and sat up slowly. "Do you think I don't know what it is to be miserable? This misery is mine. At least I can control it." Her expression hardened. "You're being childish. You're letting pride get in the way of common sense. You think surviving on your own is noble. It's reckless." I stood, facing her, the frustration inside me threatening to spill over. "It's not about being noble. It's about not giving him the chance to own me again. I've lived my entire life under his shadow. I will not go back there, even if it means starving." She shook her head, clearly exasperated. "You'll regret this, you know. You're isolating yourself. We all take his help, and you're just hurting yourself." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that could make her understand. She had chosen a different path, one that aligned with the world's definition of comfort and security. I had chosen mine, defined by the scars of the past and the desire for autonomy that night. I sat by my window, listening to the hum of the city below. The streetlights cast long shadows across the walls of my apartment, and I felt the familiar ache of solitude. Independence came at a high cost, long hours, exhaustion, and moments of intense loneliness, but it was a cost I was willing to pay. I thought about my father again, about the duality of his presence, the generous provider, and the fearsome figure of my childhood. That duality had shaped everything I had become. It had made me wary, resilient, and fiercely protective of myself. Accepting his money would have been like erasing all of that, like admitting that the boy who had once trembled in fear had never truly grown. And so I persisted. I continued to push through exhaustion and loneliness, proving to myself every day that I could survive on my own terms. The city around me seemed indifferent to my struggles, yet somehow it was liberating. Each challenge I faced, each obstacle I overcame, strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just surviving, I was living by my own rules. By the end of that week, my siblings had grown silent on the matter. They still criticized in whispers, but they had learned, at least for now, that my decision was immovable. I had set a boundary that no amount of guilt or persuasion could cross, and in that boundary lay a strange kind of peace, a reminder that, though my life was far from easy, it belonged entirely to me. The tension with my family remained, of course. Their judgments, their incredulity, their assumptions about my inability to cope would resurface from time to time. But I had learned to let those moments pass without surrendering to them. I had learned that freedom, true freedom, was more valuable than comfort, more valuable than money, more valuable than the approval of those who had never understood my scars. And so I continued, step by step, day by day, carrying the weight of both past and present, refusing to allow anyone, not even my father, to dictate the terms of my life. Would you rather sleep on the streets than accept money from the very person who destroyed your childhood? That was my choice. My father, wealthy, generous, always offering help, was also the man who abused us growing up. My siblings took his money without a second thought, but me. I would rather struggle alone than owe him anything. This is the story of why I said no, even when it meant losing everything. I don't think most people truly understand what it feels like to turn down help you desperately need. It sounds irrational, even reckless. But when the lifeline comes from the very hand that once dragged you under, you start to wonder, will grabbing it save me, or pull me under again? That's exactly how I felt every time my father offered to help me. On paper, he was the kind of father anyone could envy. Wealthy, successful, always willing to pay for tuition, fix the plumbing, or cover unexpected bills. To the outside world, he was generous, respectable, and kind. My siblings saw him that way without hesitation. They admired him, trusted him, leaned on him. I could not, because behind the generosity was the man who had turned our childhood into a nightmare. He had taught me that love was conditional, that family was no place for safety, and that hands could be used more for punishment than comfort. So when he offered help now, no matter how desperate my situation, all I could hear was the echo of the past. I saw the child I had once been, trembling in a dark room, searching for a shred of warmth that had never come. I felt the shame of being trapped in his orbit again. Accepting his money now would be like giving him permission to control me once more. I would rather be homeless than give him that power. I remember the first time he tried to help me after I left home. I was 19, just starting college. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the campus library, evenings washing dishes in a small Italian restaurant. Sleep was scarce, tuition felt like a mountain, and there were nights when the electricity got cut off because I couldn't pay. When my father found out, he shook his head, then pulled out a check and placed it in front of me, as if to prove I couldn't survive without him. "You don't need to struggle like this," he said, his voice a mixture of pity and command. "Take this, and life will be easier." I pushed the check back at that moment. I wasn't sure if I hated his pity more, or the thought of being bound again. My childhood memories were a series of storms, with almost no calm moments. I remembered his sudden outbursts, his shouts echoing through the house, the feeling that every mistake I made would be met with punishment. I learned to stay silent, to avoid his gaze, to survive without ever provoking him. My siblings adapted differently. They accepted his money, depended on him, convinced themselves it was normal. I watched them from afar, sometimes feeling both pity and anger, because they had never known freedom. Anger because they seemed to forget the pain that still lingered for me. Now, years into my own independence, life was still a struggle. My apartment was small, barely furnished, and I still worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Each day began as a grind. Breakfast for myself, morning job, classes, evening job, sleep, and then repeat. I never complained, because my independence was the only pride I could truly call mine. And when my father appeared, offering to help, I didn't see kindness. I saw control. I saw the past reaching out to claim me again. My siblings knew about it and, unsurprisingly, criticized me. They called me stubborn, childish, unrealistic. They said I couldn't survive without his money. They didn't understand that my refusal wasn't about pride, was about freedom, about preserving myself, about proving that I could exist without owing him anything. I only said one thing: you'll regret taking his money because when he has the chance, he'll use it against you. I refused, and I'm still standing. I may fail, but I will fail on my own terms, not his. I remember lying awake in my small, dimly lit apartment, listening to the rain patter against the window, reminding myself that if I ever gave in, I would lose more than money. I had seen my siblings laugh and joke while accepting gifts, checks, favors, and I understood that for them, money was salvation. For me, it was a chain. Every step toward independence was hard, but I learned that independence wasn't just about survival. It was about self-respect, about maintaining dignity, about not letting the past dictate the future. I did everything on my own: school, work, bills, even when exhaustion threatened to crush me. I remember the way my father looked at me during our encounters, half pride, half challenge, as if asking, "Can you really survive without me?" And I would look back, silently reminding myself that my existence, my successes or failures, didn't need his judgment or his aid. In that dimly lit room, the warm yellow glow of a single lamp, I gazed out the window at people walking by on the street, each carrying their own stories, their own battles. I told myself, no matter what happens, I will keep moving forward. I will hold on to my pride, even if it means hunger, fatigue, or loneliness, because freedom, independence, and the ability to live on my own terms, that is what I had learned from a childhood full of pain. Asterisk. The following weeks were relentless. My life became a constant balancing act between survival and ambition. Mornings began before sunrise, with a hurried breakfast of toast and coffee, often consumed while scanning emails or reviewing lecture notes. By the time I arrived at the library, I was already exhausted, yet I forced myself into focus, shelving books, assisting students, cataloging archives tasks that, while mundane, provided a sense of stability and order. After classes, I would rush to my evening job, the clatter of dishes and the sharp smell of tomato sauce and garlic greeting me like an old enemy. Hours slipped by, fingers raw from scrubbing, back aching from bending over sinks and counters. Each tip earned was precious, but barely enough to supplement the paycheck that already went to rent, utilities, and groceries. Sometimes I caught glimpses of my classmates or co-workers, lounging or chatting, seemingly carefree. A pang of envy hit me how easy their lives looked, how smooth the path they walked seemed. But envy quickly gave way to determination. Every ounce of effort I put into my survival was proof that I was living on my own terms. I refused to let my father's money taint that independence, no matter how tempting the relief it could bring. Late one night, exhausted, I walked home through the quiet streets. The city was alive, yet indifferent, neon lights reflecting on puddles from an earlier rain. The occasional passerby hurrying past without notice. I clutched my backpack tightly, feeling the ache in my shoulders and knees, but also a strange sense of pride. Each step was proof that I could endure, that I could survive the very hardships that might have broken someone else. But survival came at a cost. There were nights I went to bed hungry, stretching a single can of beans or leftover bread to last 2 days. Laundry was a weekly ritual done in the communal laundromat, where I watched other people's ease and convenience, silently reminding myself of how much harder my path had become. There was no complaining, no pity parties, only the quiet determination to prove to myself that I could exist without being beholden to anyone. I often replayed memories of my father in my mind, the way he could switch from charm to wrath in an instant, the way his gaze could fill a room with tension, the unpredictability that made childhood feel like walking on a tightrope. Accepting his money now would be more than a financial decision. It would be surrendering to that unpredictable power once more. And I could not, would not, do that. Amidst the exhaustion, there were moments that reminded me why I endured. A library patron thanking me for helping find a long-lost book, a colleague acknowledging my dedication, a professor complimenting my perseverance. These small recognitions became lifelines. They were reminders that my efforts, though unseen by my family or by my father, had value. They were proof that I could succeed without taking shortcuts, without allowing anyone else to dictate the terms of my existence. One particularly rough evening, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment, the overhead light harsh and glaring. Bills were stacked in front of me, each envelope a stark reminder of the precarious balance I maintained. Rent, utilities, tuition, groceries. The numbers blurred together, but I calculated every cent meticulously. I had learned to survive on a knife's edge, cutting corners without compromising dignity. That night, the weight of exhaustion hit me fully. I closed my eyes, allowing myself a moment to feel the fatigue, the hunger and the ache in my muscles, but also the satisfaction that it was mine alone. My siblings occasionally checked in, though the tone was often condescending. "You don't have to do all this yourself," my sister said one morning over the phone. "You could take a break. You could take money from Dad. It's not a failure, it's just smart." I listened silently, resisting the urge to argue. I wanted to tell them that independence wasn't just about surviving. It was about reclaiming control, about refusing to allow the past to define the present. I wanted them to understand that every dollar I earned on my own was a statement. I belonged to no one, but words often failed me. They couldn't see what I saw, couldn't feel what I felt. My struggle was internal, invisible, yet immensely real. And so I carried on in silence, letting actions speak louder than explanations. Late nights were the hardest. After both jobs, after homework and study sessions, I would collapse onto the worn sofa or lie on the mattress on the floor, exhausted beyond comprehension. Thoughts of my father sometimes surfaced, uninvited, like shadows creeping into my mind. I imagined him smiling as I struggled, imagining that he could always swoop in with a check, reminding me who held the power. And yet, I resisted. Each night I chose sleep over taking the easy way, hunger over submission, solitude over surrender. My body ached, my mind raced, but my spirit remained intact. The choice to remain independent, to endure the hardship alone, was more valuable than any comfort he could buy. I kept a journal tucked under the mattress. Writing became my refuge, my way to process the emotional turbulence of a life lived in constant tension between need and principle. I wrote about the exhaustion, the hunger, the fleeting moments of triumph. I wrote about my siblings' dismissals, my father's looming presence, and my own stubborn resolve. Reading those pages later, I realized that survival was more than endurance. It was proof of resilience, of personal integrity, of a life lived on one's own terms. One evening, as the city lights reflected in the window pane, I realized that I had developed a rhythm of life entirely my own. Despite the struggle, despite the loneliness, I had learned to find pockets of peace. The library became a sanctuary, the small apartment a fortress of autonomy. I had learned to cook meals that were simple but nourishing, to organize bills with precision, to navigate every challenge with a quiet determination, even as my siblings continued to criticize. Even as my father's offers hovered like an invisible threat, I had built a life that, though far from comfortable, was wholly mine. Each hardship faced without succumbing to his control reinforced my identity. Each exhausting day was a victory in a war fought quietly but relentlessly, and I knew, deep down, that this choice, this stubborn, painful, exhausting choice was shaping me into someone unbreakable, someone who would never again be owned or diminished. No matter how enticing the lifeline offered by my father, the tension in my family was never fully silent. It lingered like a shadow, always present, always watching. Even when we spoke about neutral topics, there was an underlying current of judgment, a reminder that my choice to remain independent was not understood or accepted. One Sunday afternoon, I received a call from my father. Hearing his voice still sent a shiver down my spine, even after years of distance. "I hear things are difficult for you," he said, his tone oddly casual. "You don't have to do this alone. I can help." I could feel the old fear rising, an echo of the boy who used to cower at the sound of his father's footsteps. Yet I had learned to breathe through the panic, to steady my voice. "I don't need your help," I replied, firm, unwavering. "I can manage." There was a pause on the line, a silence that was thick and heavy. I imagined him smiling, that faint, controlled smile of his, the one that meant he was amused but also calculating. Then he spoke again, his words almost venomous in their calmness. "Don't make me regret offering." The line went dead. I sat there, frozen, heart pounding, mind racing. His words weren't just a threat, they were a reminder of every harsh punishment, every raised voice, every instant I had learned to shrink and survive. The past and present collided in that single phrase. Later that evening, I spoke with my sister, hoping for some semblance of support. Instead, the conversation spiraled into an argument. "You can't keep living like this," she shouted, her voice echoing off the thin walls of my apartment. "You're burning yourself out. You're making yourself miserable for no reason. And what reason would justify surrendering to him?" I shot back, the frustration and anger I had been bottling up all week finally surfacing. "Do you not remember what he did to us? Every strike, every yell, every time he made me feel worthless. Do you think accepting his money would erase that? Because it wouldn't." Her face paled, not from shock, but perhaps from the realization that my resolve wasn't just stubbornness, it was survival. "You're exaggerating," she said softly, almost too softly, as if afraid to admit the truth. "He's changed. He's offering help now." I shook my head, exhaustion mingling with indignation. "He hasn't changed. He's the same man who controlled us, terrified us, punished us. Every offer of help carries a shadow of that control. I will not let him touch my life that way again." We fell silent after that. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking, yet impossible to dissipate. That night, lying in my small, dimly lit apartment, memories surged unbidden. I could see myself as a child, small and trembling, hiding under blankets while he roared down the hall. I remembered the sudden slaps, the cruel words thrown like daggers, the nights when sleep was impossible because I feared what he might do next. Each memory was vivid, painful, yet a part of the foundation that had made me who I was. I thought about the streets outside, the distant sounds of life continuing, indifferent to my struggles. Each footstep on the pavement, each laugh echoing in passing cafes, reminded me that the world didn't wait for anyone to heal. Survival wasn't about comforted, was about persistence, about refusing to be broken again. Even with exhaustion pulling at my body, I felt a strange sense of pride. I had survived his reign of fear. I had refused to let him buy my compliance. I had endured hunger, fatigue, and loneliness, yet remained unbroken. The small victories, though invisible to others, were monumental to me. In the days that followed, my siblings occasionally tried to intervene. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" my brother asked over lunch one day. "You could accept help and focus on building your future. Why insist on making things harder than they already are?" I met his gaze steadily, because independence isn't just about convenience. It's about owning my life. Every choice I make without him, every challenge I face on my own, strengthens me. I refuse to be indebted to a man who once made my life a nightmare. He shook his head, frustration etched on his features. "You're making it all about pride. You're punishing yourself for the past." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but it's the only way I know how to survive without fear. I'd rather suffer on my own than live under his control again." That evening, I returned to my apartment after a long day. The city streets were wet from an earlier storm, neon reflections shimmering on puddles. I paused, looking at the reflection of myself in the rain-drenched window. I was tired, haggard, worn, yet my eyes held a spark of defiance that had grown over years of struggle. I thought of the countless nights I had spent calculating bills, stretching meals, pushing through exhaustion, and refusing to surrender. Each sacrifice had built an unshakable resolve. I had learned that autonomy was more precious than comfort, more vital than money, more enduring than the approval of those who failed to understand me. Even as my father's shadow loomed, even as my siblings continued to misunderstand me, I knew one truth. I had reclaimed my life. Every hardship endured on my own terms was proof that I was no longer a child living under his fear. I was my own person, unbroken and fiercely independent. The weight of solitude was heavy, but it was mine to bear. Each challenge faced, each exhausting day survived, reminded me that I was living by my own rules. My father's offers of help no longer threatened me, they were reminders of how far I had come. My siblings' criticism no longer shook me, they were echoes of a world that did not see the price. I had paid for freedom, and in that knowledge I found a quiet strength, a strength forged in fear, honed through hardship, and tempered by resilience. A strength that no amount of money could buy and no hand could take away. I was free. I was independent, and I would remain so, no matter the cost. The following weeks were some of the hardest I had faced. Each day brought a new set of obstacles. Late-night shifts that left my body aching. Unexpected bills that forced me to reallocate the last of my funds. And the constant mental strain of planning every step meticulously. Yet, through all of it, I felt an unfamiliar clarity. I was no longer simply surviving. I was claiming ownership of my life, one exhausting moment at a time. One rainy afternoon, my father called again. I could hear the faint echo of the storm outside, but his voice cut sharper than the rain against the windows. "I can help you. You don't have to do this alone. Take it. You know it will make life easier." I held the phone tightly, feeling the old tension rise, the familiar pit of fear and anger stirring in my chest. "No," I said firmly. "I will manage. I will survive on my own." There was silence on the other end, a long pause that seemed to stretch forever. Then came the cold words I had heard many times before, now wrapped in subtle malice. "Don't make me regret offering." The line went dead, leaving me in the dim light of my small apartment, heart pounding, thoughts racing. His words weren't just a threat, they were a reminder that the boy who had once cowered still existed somewhere inside me. But this time, I refused to let him take control. I breathed deeply and reminded myself, I am no longer that child. I am the one who decides. That evening, I sat down to write in my journal, a habit I had cultivated over years of hardship. The pen moved quickly, recording thoughts that had no audience other than myself, the exhaustion, the hunger, the constant tension, and, most importantly, the triumph of having survived yet another day on my own terms. I wrote about my siblings, who continued to judge me without understanding, and about my father, who still wielded his influence in veiled threats. And I wrote about the small victories, invisible to others, that had built an unshakable sense of self. Writing allowed me to process my fear, my anger, and my pride. It reminded me that independence was not a gift, was a hard-won achievement. Every hour of labor, every skipped meal, every sleepless night had forged a part of me that no one could touch. Days turned into weeks, and slowly a pattern emerged. I continued to work tirelessly, to attend classes, to study late into the night. I learned to stretch my resources further, to find solutions to problems before they became crises. I learned the small joys of self-sufficiency, cooking a simple meal that nourished both body and spirit, paying a bill on time and feeling the control that came with it, walking home in the rain and appreciating the freedom of choice. My siblings occasionally tried to intervene, with messages or calls filled with concern or irritation, but I no longer felt the need to justify myself. I had learned that the path I had chosen, though difficult, was mine. Their approval was irrelevant. My freedom was priceless. One evening, after an exhausting double shift, I returned home to find the city quiet, drenched in the soft glow of streetlights, reflecting on wet asphalt. I paused, leaning against the doorframe, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time, I felt the weight of everything I had endured settle into a strange, liberating peace. Every struggle, every choice to say no, every rejection of my father's money had led me here, standing alone, yet unbroken. The confrontation with my family had come and gone, but the lessons remained. I realized that independence was not just about refusing help, was about defining my life on my own terms, about reclaiming the power that had been stolen from me in childhood. Each day I endured hardship by choice. I reinforced the boundaries that protected me from the past, from my father's control. From the shadow of fear, there were nights when I sat awake, heart heavy with fatigue, and wondered if I would ever feel truly safe. But safety, I understood, was not the absence of struggle, it was the ability to stand firm despite it. And I was learning to be unshakable. My father's offers, once terrifying, were now just echoes of history. My siblings' criticisms, once sharp and wounding, were now distant voices in a world I had carved out for myself. I had discovered a fundamental truth. Freedom, earned through perseverance and integrity, was more valuable than comfort or approval. Months passed. Slowly, my life stabilized. I was still exhausted, still facing challenges, but the victories, both small and large, added up. I paid my rent on time, excelled in my studies, maintained my jobs, and kept a delicate balance between survival and self-respect. I had created a rhythm that, though grueling, belonged entirely to me. One morning, while walking to the library, I noticed a group of students laughing together. I felt a pang of envy, but also a deep sense of satisfaction. I had earned every step I took, every dollar I had in my pocket, every choice I had made. Unlike many of them, I had faced the trials of life that demanded not only endurance, but courage, resilience, and steadfastness. And in that moment, I understood the full weight of my journey. I had been shaped by fear, tested by hardship, and tempered by challenge. I had faced the shadow of a father whose influence could have defined me forever, and I had refused. I had chosen autonomy over comfort, self-respect over convenience, freedom over submission. I knew the path ahead would never be easy. Life would continue to test me, push me to the limits of my endurance, tempt me with shortcuts and relief. But I also knew this: I would never again allow someone else to dictate the terms of my existence. I had claimed my life. I had claimed my freedom. And nothing, not money, not fear, not family pressure, could ever take it from me. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles of the past, the hardships of the present, the threats of the future, all of it had shaped me into someone unbreakable, someone fully alive on my own terms. I was no longer a child trembling in fear. I was a person who had fought for every inch of autonomy, and in that fight, I had discovered a power that could never be taken away. This is the story of why I said no, why I refused my father's money, why I endured hardship, why I chose independence over ease. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is this: freedom is priceless, and it is worth every sacrifice. I had chosen to live on my own terms, and in doing so, I had finally found the life I had always deserved. The morning air was crisp, almost painfully so, as I stepped out onto the streets of the city. Each breath felt like an intrusion of life into my exhausted body, yet somehow the sharp chill invigorated me. The previous night had been long, sleepless, filled with the haunting echoes of my father's voice and the lingering judgment of my siblings. My apartment, though a sanctuary in its own way, had felt suffocating under the weight of memories and the relentless pressure of survival. I carried with me the usual satchel of books, notes, and a modest lunch packed hurriedly. Every item was meticulously accounted for, each step on my route planned with precision. Independence had a cost, and I had learned to pay it daily. Yet a gnawing tension persisted in my chest, the sense that a confrontation long avoided, long feared, was approaching. My phone buzzed just as I reached the corner of the busy intersection. A message from my sister, terse and impatient. "We need to talk. Now. Don't ignore this. You're making things worse for yourself." I hesitated. Ignoring her would maintain my solitude, my control. Responding could open a floodgate I was not sure I was prepared to face. Yet, something inside me, a strange mixture of curiosity, dread, and responsibility, urged me to reply. "Fine," I texted. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th, noon." The cafe was small, almost quaint, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee beans mingled with the faint sweetness of pastries, a comforting scent that reminded me briefly of simpler, happier days, though such days had been rare. My sister was already there, seated in a corner booth, tapping her fingers impatiently. When she saw me, her expression shifted, part relief, part frustration, part incredulity. "You're late," she said sharply, though her voice carried a subtle undertone of concern. "I had work," I replied evenly, sliding into the seat to cross from her. "You wanted to talk." "Let's talk," she sighed, exhaling sharply, her hands clenching on the edge of the table. "You can't keep living like this. You're running yourself ragged. We all survived by accepting help. Well, won't you?" Her question felt familiar, like a looped recording from every confrontation we'd ever had. But this time, I allowed myself a deeper answer, one that I had not voiced in months, not even in the privacy of my journal. "Because accepting help from him would be surrender," I said, my voice low but resolute. "It's not about pride or stubbornness. It's about survival in a way he cannot touch. Every dollar I earn, every challenge I overcome without his interference, is a reclamation of my life. I refuse to give him a foothold in my future, no matter how tempting it may seem." Her eyes narrowed, a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. "Do you even realize what you're risking? School, rent, food, you're exhausting yourself. This is madness." I leaned back, letting the words settle between us like stones in a river. "Perhaps, but madness is preferable to surrender." The conversation grew heated, voices rising in the cafe, drawing curious glances from strangers. She accused, I defended. She pleaded, I stood firm. And amid the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I understood something vital. Independence was not just about survival. It was about boundaries, about protecting oneself from a past that had been cruel, unpredictable, and controlling. We argued for over an hour, dissecting every incident from our childhood, every perceived slight, every financial decision made in adulthood. My sister attempted to rationalize my father's generosity. I recounted vividly the moments when that same generosity had been a tool of manipulation. "You're exaggerating," she exclaimed, her voice breaking with frustration. "He's changed. You're living in the past." I shook my head, eyes fixed on the worn wood of the table. "He hasn't changed. He only knows how to shift his tactics. Fear is still a currency, and I refuse to trade my freedom for it." A silence followed, heavy and unyielding, as if the walls themselves were listening. We sat, breathing, neither willing to yield, yet both bound by a shared history that could not be erased. The hours that followed became a turning point. My sister, begrudgingly, began to understand the depth of my resolve. Though she still criticized, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. I would not bend. I would not compromise my independence for convenience, for comfort, or for approval. Leaving the cafe, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. The confrontation, though draining, had reinforced a truth I had carried silently for years. I belonged only to myself. Every choice I made, every hardship endured, was a statement, a declaration that the shadows of the past could not dictate my present as I walked the streets toward my evening shift. The city seemed alive in a way it never had before. The neon signs, the chatter of passers-by, the distant hum of traffic, all of it was vibrant, chaotic, and utterly indifferent to my struggle. And yet, In that indifference, I found a strange comfort. Life was happening around me, unrelenting and impartial, and I was standing firmly in its current, refusing to be swept away. Back at my apartment, late that night, I reflected on the day. Exhausted, yes, but unbroken. The confrontation with my sister had been a storm, but storms, I realized, could be survived. Dawn often left the air cleaner, the world sharper, and the spirit stronger. I understood, with a clarity that had eluded me for years, that independence was not a solitary burden, but a triumph of will. Every struggle, every sleepless night, every choice to refuse help from the one who had caused so much pain, had forged a resilience I could not have known otherwise. And I understood something else. The path I had chosen, though arduous, was not a punishment. It was my own. Every sacrifice was a step toward mastery over my life. A declaration that my freedom was not negotiable. The next days brought more challenges and expected bills. Long shifts, grueling study sessions, but they were different now. Each difficulty was no longer a threat, but a proving ground. My internal dialogue shifted from fear to determination, from doubt to confidence. The weight of independence was heavy, yes, but it was mine. Carried with pride and purpose, every interaction with my siblings became filtered through this lens. I no longer sought their approval, nor did I fear their judgment. Their disbelief, their criticisms, even their occasional ridicule, became echoes of a world that could not define me. I was alive on my own terms. I was free, and in that freedom, I felt something profound, a clarity of purpose, a deep, abiding sense of self, and the knowledge that, whatever storms lay ahead, I would face them on my own terms, unyielding, unbroken, and wholly autonomous. The morning sun filtered through my small apartment window, casting pale light across the cluttered kitchen counter. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth as it spread through my chest, and tried to quiet the nervous tension coiling inside me. Today was different. I could feel it. My father's shadow was looming closer than it had in years, not physically, but emotionally. Like a storm gathering in the distance, the phone buzzed. It was him. I stared at the screen for a moment, heart tightening. Then, with a deep breath, I answered. "Hello," I said, steadying my voice. "I hear you're struggling," he said smoothly. "Why insist on making things harder than they have to be? I can help. You know that I felt the old familiar pulse of fear, but I met it with resolve. I don't need your help," I said clearly. "I've survived without it, and I will continue to do so. I will not let you control me." There was a long pause, heavy and loaded. Then came his measured reply. "Do you really think this is independence? You're just being stubborn. Don't make me regret offering." I let out a controlled breath, feeling both anger and clarity. He could threaten, intimidate, and manipulate, but he could no longer own me. The child who had trembled in fear had grown into someone who refused to be owned. Later that day, my sister arrived at my apartment again, unannounced. This time, her demeanor was less impatient and more concerned, though the frustration lingered. "You can't keep doing this alone," she said quietly, scanning the room with a mixture of worry and disbelief. "You're pushing yourself too hard. It's not healthy." I stood, feeling the familiar surge of determination. "This isn't about health," I said calmly but firmly. "It's about freedom. Every choice I make, every hardship I endure, proves that I belong to no one but myself. I will not let past fear or convenience dictate my life. Her gaze faltered. She had grown up with me, witnessed the same household, yet she had chosen a different path, one that embraced his help without hesitation. I understood that, but I could not walk her path, for it meant surrendering my autonomy. We sat together in silence for a while, the words unnecessary. She could feel my resolve. I could see the conflict in her eyes, love and exasperation tangled together. In that quiet, I realized something essential. Even those closest to us might never fully understand our choices. And that was acceptable. That evening, I walked to the city library, the streets glistening from a light rain. The world moved around me with indifference, strangers hurrying past, streetlights flickering in puddles, the distant hum of traffic, but the weight of their indifference was liberating. Life would continue, storms or no storms, and I would continue with it, not as a victim, but as an active participant. Inside the library, I immersed myself in work, cataloging books, helping students, reviewing my notes for Class I, allowed nothing to disturb my focus. Even as fatigue threatened, I reminded myself that endurance was a form of control. By surviving, I was defining my own life, step by step, choice by choice. A student approached, smiling with gratitude for my help finding a rare text. That small acknowledgement, though seemingly insignificant, felt monumental. It was proof that effort, integrity, and independence mattered. They could not be bought or borrowed. They had to be earned. Over the following weeks, life's pressures intensified. Bills came due, shifts grew longer, classes demanded more, and the subtle threats from family, direct or implied, lingered like static in the background of my mind. Yet, each day, I faced these challenges head-on, and each day my confidence grew. I was unbroken. I was autonomous. And I was finally beginning to appreciate the depth of my own resilience. My siblings occasionally called, offering advice or criticism. I listened, but no longer felt compelled to justify myself. My choices were mine, and their disapproval had no power over me. My father's offers, once terrifying, were now distant echoes. I had outgrown the fear that had once defined my existence. One night, exhausted from double shifts and late-night study, I sat by the window, rain streaking the glass. My reflection stared back at me, a person shaped by hardship, resilience, and unwavering self-determination. The child I once was, the fearful, obedient boy, had survived, endured, and transformed into someone capable of standing alone, fully and unapologetically. I thought about the past. Every harsh word, every raised hand, every moment of fear had contributed to the person I had become. It had been painful, often excruciating, but it had also been formative. The lessons I learned were etched deeply into my sense of self, that freedom was earned, that autonomy required sacrifice, and that no external force could dictate my life unless I allowed it. Months passed. I maintained my jobs, excelled in my studies, and managed my modest apartment with care. I still faced exhaustion and financial strain, but the victory lay not in comfort, but in choice. I had claimed my life. Every hardship endured was a testament to my independence, every success a symbol of my agency. And one evening, after finishing a particularly grueling shift, I returned home and sat quietly, reflecting. I realized I'd grown in ways I could not have imagined. I was strong not despite my challenges, but because of them. I was free not because the world had granted it, but because I had claimed it through courage, perseverance, and unwavering self-respect. I understood. Finally, that freedom was a conscious, continuous act. It was choosing to stand firm even when every part of the world, including one's own family, urged compromise. It was choosing self-respect over comfort, autonomy over ease, and integrity over approval. And in that understanding, I felt complete. The struggles, the conflicts, the loneliness, soul of it had led to this moment. I had fought not only for survival, but for the sacred right to exist on my own terms. I was independent. I was unbroken. I was free. The day began like any other, yet there was a tension in the air I could not ignore. My phone rang early in the morning, and this time it was my father. The voice that had haunted so many of my nights carried a calmness that was almost unnatural. "I hear you're struggling more than usual," he said, the casual tone masking the veiled threat underneath. "Why do you insist on suffering alone? Let me help. You know it will make things easier." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of years of fear, manipulation, and frustration settle around me. My hands gripped the phone tightly. "No," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I do not need your help, and I will not accept it. I've survived without your interference, and I will continue to do so. I am no longer a child to be controlled." The silence on the other end was long and deliberate. Then came his measured, almost cold words. "You are making a mistake. Don't make me regret offering." I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and clarity. He could threaten, manipulate, or intimidate, but he no longer had power over me. I had survived the storm of his control once, and I could survive again. The boy who once trembled in fear had become a man who refused to surrender. Later that morning, my siblings arrived at my apartment, faces a mixture of worry, frustration, and reluctant respect. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, a reminder of the shared history we could never erase. My sister spoke first. "You can't keep doing this alone," she said, her voice quieter than usual, tinged with concern. "It's dangerous. You're pushing yourself too hard." I met her gaze steadily. "This isn't about ease or comfort," I said firmly. "It's about freedom. Every choice I make without their money, every challenge I endure on my own, reclaims a part of my life they once tried to control. I will not surrender my autonomy for convenience. Not now, not ever." Their expressions shifted. My brother frowned, my sister's eyes softened, yet they were still struggling to understand. I realized that my struggle was mine alone, and while they had grown up with me, they could not feel the weight of the choices I had made. The nights of hunger, exhaustion, and doubt. We argued. Voices rose and fell like waves, emotions running raw. They accused, I defended. They pleaded, I stood firm. And as the tension escalated, I allowed myself to revisit the childhood memories I had worked so hard to bury. The sudden shouts, the cruel punishments, the constant fear of anger erupting without warning. Every memory fueled my determination, reinforcing the invisible armor I had built around myself. "You're being stubborn," my sister finally said, almost wearily. "You don't realize how much easier it would be if you just accepted help." "I realize more than you think," I replied, voice calm but resolute. "I know exactly what it means to be indebted to someone who has caused you pain. I know exactly what it means to trade comfort for fear. I will not do it. I will endure, I will survive, and I will remain free." There was silence, thick and heavy, as they digested the force of my words. No one spoke immediately. It was as if my declaration had created a space in which nothing else could intrude, a space of self-possession and unyielding resolve. Hours later, my father arrived, unannounced. Seeing him standing at the threshold of my apartment, I felt a flicker of the old fear, but it was quickly replaced by calm resolve. He carried himself with the same measured authority, the same faint, controlled smile, but I was no longer the child he could intimidate. "I heard about your choices," he said quietly. "Why insist on this? You're exhausting yourself. Why not accept my help?" I stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes meeting his directly. "Because this is my life," I said, each word deliberate. "I have endured your control, your manipulation, and your fear. I have survived on my own terms. I will not allow you to dictate my life, to own me, or to use money as leverage over my freedom. I am independent, and I will remain so." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, a mixture of surprise, recognition, and perhaps respect, not for me as a child, but for the person I had become. "You've grown stubborn," he said finally, his voice softer. "I suppose. You always were." I nodded. "I've grown stronger, too, and I will not compromise who I am for convenience, fear, or approval." The confrontation ended without violence, without apologies, without forced reconciliation, and yet it was complete. I had faced the people who had once dominated my life, resisted the lure of comfort that came at the cost of submission, and emerged intact. For the first time, I truly felt the depth of my freedom. In the days that followed, life continued. Bills came due, classes demanded more effort, work remained exhausting, but the weight felt different. I was no longer carrying the invisible chains of fear or control. Each challenge was an opportunity to assert autonomy. Each success a testament to perseverance. My siblings still expressed concern, occasionally frustration, but I had learned to accept that they could not fully understand my choices. My father remained distant, his offers now empty echoes, and I finally understood a profound truth. Independence was not just a series of decisions. It was a state of being, a daily reaffirmation of the right to live on my own terms. One quiet night, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on wet streets after a sudden rain. I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. The boy who had trembled in fear had been replaced by someone capable of facing storms unflinchingly. The struggles, the exhaustion, the confrontations, all of it, had forged a resilience I could not have imagined. Freedom, I realized, was earned. It was defended in countless small ways every day, choosing integrity over convenience, courage over fear, self-respect over submission. And now, having faced the ultimate test, I understood that freedom was also a state of mind, a choice to refuse domination, to claim life on one's own terms, and to remain unbroken regardless of external pressures. I took out my journal, writing a final entry, the reflections, the victories, the moments of doubt, and the lessons that had carried me through. I wrote about fear transformed into strength, dependence transformed into autonomy, and the certainty that my life belonged only to me. Looking back, I realized the journey had been as much internal as external. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every confrontation with family had been a crucible, and I had emerged tempered and unshakable. I finally understood the full weight of my own power, that living on one's own terms was the greatest triumph of all. The past could not define me. Fear could not bind me. Approval could not sway me. I was alive, independent, and free, and the message was clear. Life would always offer temptation, convenience, and shortcuts, but true freedom and self-respect were earned in the struggle, defended in daily choices, and cherished in the quiet moments of reflection. To live fully, one must claim autonomy, embrace resilience, and never surrender one's life to the control of another. This was the life I had chosen. This was the life I had fought for. And in that choice, I had found the truest form of victory.